Hello everyone, and today we're going to talk about ED documentation, how to document in the chart, and then how to create your notes. No more paper, and it is pretty scary to give up paper and go electronic. However, I assure you it is more efficient, more informative, and more accurate. All of the documentation and creating notes takes place in PowerChart. This is one of the few things that we cannot do in ED Launchpoint or the tracker. Documentation actually happens all across the patient's journey. It starts in triage and nursing, and then during our assessments and reassessments. And as we are documenting, either typing, clicking, or dictating into the chart, this data is kept in the chart, but it's not yet into a note. It's not finalized. It can be edited and changed as the patient is traveling through their journey. Creating a note or the actual visit document at the end actually happens at a point in time, usually at the end of your care when everything is complete, and that is your final documentation of the visit. That goes in the patient record. A note can include all the data that you documented along the patient's journey. It also includes free text, whether it's editing the data it pulls from your documentation or entering free text completely new. How does documentation happen? How do we document the chart? It's really an incremental process. From our ED physician workflow, the first time we document is really when we do our history review of systems and physical examination. Whether you type them or you dictate them or you insert a template, that'd be the first piece of data that you put in. You still haven't created an ED note. And then as you travel with the patient, you start documenting your procedures and your resuscitations. Then you go back to your reassessments every time. You enter a line of two. You review the x-ray. You enter a line of two. You add a problem. You add a diagnosis. You decide on an impression and plan. You collect all these data, and then you go to create your note. And the note pulls all of these in to create your final document. Not only that, the clinical note pulls other data, like medications, diagnostic imaging, other histories documented by the nurse, other tagged items that you've tagged that you want them added to your note. And these usually, in our case, mean labs. Not only that, free text. Now you can go in and edit any of this data that it pulled, or you can put something in totally, completely from scratch. What types of ED notes do we have? Well, first, let's see where ED notes live. This is a typical patient chart in PowerChart, and the first place is here in documentation. This is actually where all documents live, and if you click it, it'll open the documentation tab, and in there you will see a list of all your documentation on this patient. You can sort them out, but here also you can add a document by clicking add, and you will have access to every type of document that is in the system. However, the best way to do it is from the light menu right here. What we have done is we've basically classified ED notes into three types. The first is an ED note physician. This is really your main ED note for the visit. This is done by the doc who provided the majority of care, and it pulls, remember all these documentations you made along the way? This note pulls them all in plus more. The other type is what we call ED quick note. ED quick note is really a blank free text note. It works great for all other kinds of small notes. So initial assessments. When you do an ECG and order something, this is where you create your document. It can be 2 or 3 sentences long, and that's it. Went in the chart and you're done. If you provide procedural sedation or anesthesia, if you help out in a resuscitation, CDU. So whenever you receive a CDU and at the end you want to create a document, you don't have to create a full document. You can if you want to, but you should be able, because your other physician has created their note, to create sort of a small note of what you did for the patient in CDU. Procedure notes as well. If you walk in and do a procedure for a patient who's being cared for by another doc, you can create a quick free text note. The last type of document we put in is a consult or a handoff note. This has a different note structure than the ED note. It pulls all the documentations you did in history physical assessment. It also adds labs and DI, and it's a great tool if you want to hand off a patient to somebody else. One thing to note is that ED notes or notes in general are not shared between providers. So I am assessing and documenting along the way. You're assessing and documenting along the way. I create an ED note physician. It pulls my documentations. Your ED note physician or handoff note will pull yours. They work in parallel. They are not shared across the platform. Same time, when you create an ED note physician and it pulls all the stuff that you've documented already, now these are blank. you can start all over again and you can create more than one type of note. You can create an ED handoff and then you can create an ED quick note if you want to. There's no limitation on that. Now, as always, don't sign, modify. So when you go to sign your note, if you have created your note and saved it, get into the habit of refreshing it before you sign it. So that way, if you have changed or updated any of your history, physical reassessments, it'll pull the new data from the patient's chart. Second thing, try to give it a name, especially if it's one of the quick ED notes, so we can differentiate if this is a CDU note, if this is an anesthesia note, if this is a concomitant care note or initial assessment note. Then pick who you want to send a copy to. You can pick from the physician provider library there. Now you can sign it. And once you sign it, your note is final. You cannot change it after you sign it. You can only add an addendum. Of course, you can create a brand new note from scratch. That is okay. All notes, once signed, lived either in the blue menu under documentations or in the gray menu in the patient's chart under clinical documents. So you can go there, right click, add an addendum, etc. Let's demo some documentation as we're seeing the patient. So let's go through the documentation. Let's see that we're seeing this patient here. And this is their chart in PowerChart. I've put it up as I like it, and I've put all my documentation on the right-hand side. So I go see the patient. As I'm done, I'm going to document by dictating through Dragon. 45-year-old male with sudden onset chest pain, period. Central radiating to the left shoulder, period. Mild nausea, period. No shortness of breath, period. No cough or infective symptoms, period. No edema, period. Normal JVP, period. Normal pulses, period. Head neck examination is negative, period. Mucous membranes are normal, period. Skin is normal, period. Chest shows some basal crackles, period. Cardiac examination shows a mild ejection fraction. Murmur, period. Abdomen and back examination are normal, period. Oops, I documented in review of systems instead of physical examination. I'm going to select, Control X, Control Paste. Perfect. Let me go back and do review of systems. Review of systems was non-contributory, period. Patient received IV fluids and analgesia, period. He responded well to nitro sublingually, period. I came back later and reassessed him. Patient's pain improved with treatment, period. He's currently pain-free, period. I'm going to document the ECG, and I'm going to say ECG showed 1 to 2 millimeter ST elevation. Depression in the lateral leads, period. There was no ST elevation, period. There are no Q waves, period. I went back and did another ECG, and I'm going to say new paragraph. Repeat ECG showed no dynamic changes, period. New paragraph. Chest X-ray was reviewed and was negative, period. And now I went back a little while later and I decided that I want to give him under procedures here, new paragraph. Patient received aspirin, Plavix, fondaparinux, period. And then finally, I decided to give him to cardiology. I discussed the case with Dr. Mackett, who's the cardiologist on call, period. He's kind enough to come and see the patient and assume care, period. Now, I want to discharge the patient. I'm not going to discharge, so actually I'm going to do a consult, so there's not going to be a discharge order. I'm just going to put a diagnosis in here. So he has multiple diagnoses. Let's call these all chronic. And then let's write here in STEMI. Here he is. Non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. And it's added now and it's added chronic. I don't want it chronic. I just want it now. Well, let's leave it for chronic. That's okay. Call the cardiologist and the patient on his way. Now that we've documented, let's try creating an ED note physician. Now we're back to the same patient. We want to create our note. And now, at some point, I know in his labs there was something I wanted to tag, so I'm going to pick up his glucose here, for example. But I can tag it here, but what I'm going to do also is I want to get his creatinine level, for example, and I want to get his potassium and sodium and INR. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tag them all, and you will see they showed up here in my tagged items. Okay, so from anywhere within the patient's chart, I'm going to create ED note physician. Now what this did, it's pulled everything I documented, my diagnosis, my intervention, my physical exam. It added here an oxygen, added my procedures, and brought in all my diagnoses and tagged my results and investigations and EKG and X-ray. If I want to change any of these, all I have to do is click that little arrow there. The patient also received Tylenol 650 milligrams orally. That is there. I am now happy with it. I'm going to click sign and submit. Now I can change the note. I'm going to add Dr. Mackett. Let's see if he's in the system. There are many Macketts. I'm going to add Dr. Mackett. And now I'm going to sign the note. And we are done. And as you know, your notes will live both in clinical documentation. Here we are. And as well in the blue menu in documentation, it is here, my ED note. Well, how about adding an addendum? Now let's add an addendum to my ED note. I can find it anywhere, so I'm going to find it in clinical documentation. This is my note. Open it. I'm going to say modify and put an addendum here. I can type or I can dictate. The patient developed another episode of chest pain before the arrival of cardiology period. His ECG showed no changes period. He received 2 sprays of nitro with complete resolution of pain period. And I'm going to sign that. Now the report has an addendum. If I open it now, I should see my addendum at the bottom of the screen, and there it is. There you go. How about we try to create a handover or a consult note? Now, let's create a handoff or a consult note. Very similarly, we're going to have some history and physical. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat this time, and I'm going to show you that I can actually copy and paste. History and physical, I can copy that, and I can paste it here. For management, for example, I can pull that. Under procedures, I can do physical exam as well. Can I drag it? Yes, I can. I'm going to put it here, drag it and drop it. Or I can tag it to be added to my report. It tells me where it came from. An EKG. I'm going to take that. I'm going to copy it and paste it. Now, instead of creating an ED note, I'm going to create a consult note. And now what you will see, it'll pull up the same stuff, but it added all the labs, other labs here, X-ray. I can sign it, and now this is ready for handoff. How about creating an ED quick note? Now let's create a note from scratch. So ED Quick Note allows you to create notes that are completely free text. You don't need to have anything documented in your history and physical. All you do is go directly to your ED Quick Note. Make sure you're here. This is where we're going to use our Dragon Auto Text. So let's say I provided procedural anesthesia for this patient. Rafi's anesthesia. Haywood. Next field. Atrial fibrillation. Next field. No previous issue with anesthetics. Next field, 3, next field, normal, next field, normal, next field, 3E, next field, cardioversion, next field, received propofol 50 milligrams IV period, no complications period, required about 20 seconds of jaw thrust period. New paragraph. I am going to change that to ED anesthesia. Oops. If I know how to type, I'm going to sign it, and we are done. And if we were to refresh this, and let's go to the dark menu here to documentation, you'll see my ED anesthetic note is right there. Well, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Thank you very much for your time.